All right, continuing here, we have our references, and I have them organized. And like I showed last video, you can kind of zoom in, or you can use your view options within your folder. This is my assignment 2 folder, to organize your reference in a way that's really visible. And I'm doing that because I want to now sketch. So this is my body reference. This is my feet reference. And this is all collected even before I get a sketch to pin everything together. This is going to help inform my sketch. Some students like to get all their reference before they sketch. Some of them like to sketch and then find a reference that matches their sketch. Each is totally fine, and I've demonstrated both approaches in the past. And then sometimes you just have one reference, because I know I want this cute little yellow tail. So I'll probably use the head of this chick as the tail, right? Because it's about how it's lit and where it's placed. Okay, now, how can I sketch? Well, I recommend, unless you're really comfortable with digital sketching, I recommend just using pencil and paper. So it can be really direct and you can make edits in your sketchbook. And do I want you to fill your whole sketchbook page? No, I'm always reminding you, don't fill your whole sketchbook page. So to demonstrate that, I am going to digitally sketch just so you can just see it. I am going to start with my reference images, or my inspiration images. And I'm going to play with the view options, make them bigger. And I'm going to use them like I would use a Pokemon image to understand the anatomy I'm going for. If I'm mixing a porcupine with a dodo bird, and I'm inspired by these Oaxacan wood sculptures, I just have a little sketch brush that I created that I often use. And what makes it different than just a standard brush is it just has a slightly, softer edge like a pencil. And I'm using it at about 40% opacity, just solid black. And I'll actually do it usually on its own layer, so it's floating on top of white. But let's pretend this is your sketchbook, right? So your sketchbook is spiraled, and this is your sketchbook page. I do not want you to fill the page. Instead, I want you to think about, do I want my character to be tall? Or do I want my character to be long, right? And you don't need to sketch it multiple times, but it can't hurt to sketch it multiple times. This is to remind you, instead of filling the page, make kind of thumbnails on that page. That allows you to make notes, it allows you to make changes, and it allows you to full control of the composition rather than just letting the page aspect ratio dictate your creative decisions. Okay, the first thing I draw is what's called the cranium. That's the fishbowl around the head. And I'm going to draw it on both here. And because my inspiration is facing the right, my character is going to be facing the right. Now, what goes on the cranium? The jaw, the mandible. For a dodo, that is a beak. And beaks have different basic shapes. So I'm going to use basic shapes for this drawing. It's always the way you should start. So circles are basic shapes. These are all shapes you know. Triangles are basic shapes. Squares or rectangles are basic shapes. Right? Ovals. Perfect squares. So there's 5 basic shapes. Circle, square, oval, rectangle, and triangle. With those shapes, you can reproduce anything in 2 dimensions. You just overlap them. There's a really helpful extra 6th basic shape I use called the wedge, which is just a triangle with its head cut off. Now, you're going to see me use that. So first, I'm going to use the circles for the cranium. Then, what basic shape can I use to capture the whole of that beak? Well, it's going to be a wedge, because I like the kind of mouth open. Maybe I can make that work, maybe not. Now, at this point, and I'll zoom in because this is important, you have to decide which way is your character's head facing, your creature's head facing. And mine is facing to the right, but there's an angle to it. So this is a little bit towards the viewer. So if I was going to draw this, I would usually draw the cranium, and then I would draw what are called direction lines on the cranium that go through the eye. It's like drawing lines on an egg. So if you draw the line straight on to an egg, just like that, but then you turn the egg and tilt it in the way the cranium is, it might look like that. So this is where the eye is, and then this is where that beak shape would come out. So my wedge opens up like this. Does that make sense? And I could even show the direction of the beak. And I can break it into a triangle and then another triangle. You know, that shows the angle of the head. Really important to know the angle of the head. And you don't need to be great at drawing in order to try to figure that out. Sometimes students just do this. Angle of the head is that way. Right? Draw an arrow. Because that's then going to flow into the spine. And the spine connects with the back of the cranium and should curve, sometimes dramatically, as it does on birds with long necks, right, into the body. Now notice I'm already breaking out of my little thumbnail. That's why you don't want to try to fill a page, because you often run into the edge of the page, and that's a problem. So, a lot of overlap is necessary in this. So that's about the length of the neck I want, whether it's what I observe or just what I picture in my mind. But then when it comes to the body, I want to think of the porcupine a little bit. And I want to think, okay, I need it to be really round and really curved on the back, because this is going to be the porcupine stuff. And maybe I even make a note there. It wouldn't make sense to put a porcupine's head on a dodo's body, because neither of those things is really recognizable. I'm using like the most significant inspiration I can. So I have the dodo head on a porcupine body, but I'm looking at the length of the skeleton. So here is the neck, here is the body. The body, just like the head, is made up of two parts. It's made up of a rib cage. So you need to kind of draw in where that rib cage would be. And then the angle of the rib cage tells you how the arms, or in this case, wings, are connected to it. So what I'm doing is drawing through, that's the collarbone of the rib cage. So I always try to draw the angle of the collarbone. You can feel it on yourself. The collarbone connects to the shoulders. So this is the shoulder that's closest to me. That is where the wing comes from. And I'll just do a big oval to show the wing. Now, if I want to do a more complex wing, I could even do the joints with lines like that. Right. And then the pin feathers. And that's how a wing works. But the most important thing is I know where it connects. I'll do that in red. So the things that are important: the cranium, the spine, the rib cage, and the joint connections, because that will tell you the angle of the reference you're trying to find. Okay, what's next on the spine? You can think of the spine as a necklace that's holding these things together. Cranium, rib cage, what's next? The pelvis. The pelvis on a walking bird like a dodo is pretty big. It's actually as wide as the rib cage. It's not as tall as the rib cage, but it's as wide. That makes the joints on that pelvis further apart than they are on smaller birds. And then the legs, you can see, actually you can't see, it's kind of hidden, but they come forward just like our upper leg, our femur. Then they go backwards, so the knee on this dodo is right up here. And then where our ankle is what we think of as most animals' knees. But it's actually their ankle, because animals who are bipedal or animals that are quadrupedal, they're almost always walking on their toes or their hooves, right? So if you were to, pretend you're in stiletto heels, then take the heels away, but keep your feet where they are, that's how animals walk. That's how cats walk, horses walk, giraffes walk. Elephants are a little different, but other than that. So This is where sometimes it's called the backwards bending knee, right? But those are the segments of the leg, and then you have the foot. In this case, this kind of triangular foot. And I need to also have it back here. That's why I'm drawing through and connecting it. Okay, then what kind of tail do I want? The tail flows off of the spine. This is just a tiny little tail with a big poof. So that is my sketch. Now, can I do that same thing and make it less upright and more horizontal? Well, let's try. I'll use blue here just to make it different. So I start with the cranium. I'll dim this other drawing. All right. And then I'm going to use that same kind of angle. I don't want to have the head facing away from me because that isn't very descriptive. I want it turned a little bit towards me. So same sort of angle as I did from the taller view. I know that the head is facing kind of this direction. And then I'm going to change that spine a little bit, where the neck is shorter and not as vertical. And then the rib cage, I'm going to really play up, because this is a lower to the ground creature, that rib cage size. So it's almost more like a beaver or like the porcupine. And then the collarbone is going to be lower down instead of higher up like for wings, because this is a big barrel rib cage. And the arm is actually going to come out here and like that to the paw or whatever it is. And then the other one would be like that as well. So collarbone, rib cage. The pelvis, I'm going to make quite a bit smaller because this is a creature that's mostly going to walk on its front legs. And then its back legs are going to be the same reference. Whoops. But they start by coming forward, right? Just really short, the femur, and then coming out like this. Almost like the back legs of a hamster. Okay. And then the tail is going to come through. And then what kind of tail do I want? Well, I could do a puffy tail, but maybe I'll curve it up, right? Because tails don't drag on the ground. So the shapes will be different. So you start with this kind of skeletal structure, and then on top of that, you can build and make note of where you want your details. So this is going to be kind of the parrot stuff. This is going to be the beak. This is going to be the neck. I'll make it all feathery. This is going to be the back, which is all porcupine spiny. And then this is going to be like chicken feet or rooster feet. And then here, do I want these to be wings or do I want them to be arms? You know, what reference would make sense for this? Because this is an animal that can walk more on its front feet. I might look at ground sloths, or I might look at bears, or I might look like other creatures that have really heavy forearms instead of wings. All right, and now I can choose. Here are two different approaches using the same set of references that I've familiarized myself with. Which one do I like the feel of, right? And that's just a personal choice. But just like we can play with our landscape and those references, we can also do that with these body parts. And I think I'm most interested in this one because I want it to feel, I have a square landscape. I want it to feel like it really kind of lives in that space. And Aesop's fables often have the animals talk and be more humanoid. So upright makes it feel more like that. So now I'm just going to refine my sketch a little bit. Not because I need to really, because I actually understand what I drew. It only matters that you understand your sketch. But so that it communicates a little bit more clearly to you. The spine through to the tail, the pelvis, the hips. Notice how I'm drawing like an X-ray. I'm drawing even the things that are covered up by the body because I need to see those connections. Just like making a little pipe cleaner maquette like R.J. Palmer does. The rib cage, the collarbone,